China says it's going to defend its national interests after Donald Trump's latest comments on imposing tariffs on Chinese goods. The US president said his administration is considering introducing import taxes of 10% as early as next week. He says the measure would be in response to China supplying Mexico and Canada with fentanyl, a synthetic opioid drug.
We have always believed there are no winners in a trade war or tariff war. China remains firmly committed to safeguarding national interests.
Katrina Yu has more from Beijing.
Beijing has said that if the Trump administration imposes these new tariffs, it has no intention of taking things lying down. It will respond. We've also heard from them earlier this year denying those allegations from Donald Trump that China is not doing enough to stem the tide of fentanyl to the US. It says much progress has actually been made on this front in recent years. Also talking about tariffs is Ding Xuexiang, China's vice premier, who is in Davos this week. He said that countries should not choose protectionism, that they should instead look for win-win solutions. And he referred to China's massive global trade surplus, which is estimated to be around $1 trillion. And he said that Beijing does not have this as a goal, and it is actually really open to importing more goods from other countries. So there, Beijing is signaling to the Trump administration it's willing to do a deal to avoid new tariffs. However, if that does not work out, it will respond. And this could be in the form of its own tariffs. It could retaliate against US firms operating in China or tighten export controls on crucial minerals such as rare earths. Regardless of what it chooses to do, it is waiting for Trump to make the first move. And China has said these tariffs will not be paid for by China. They say it was American consumers who will pay for these tariffs. However, it is also clear that this will harm China's economy, which is still struggling to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. Here, growth has slowed. Traditional drivers of growth, such as the housing market, are in crisis. And although Beijing says it wants to shift away from its manufacturing model, it still very much relies on its export market. So new US tariffs are bad news, and they're also bad news for sentiment. Consumer and business confidence in China at the moment is at a low. New tariffs are certainly not going to help that. Katrina Yu, Al Jazeera, Beijing.
Let's get more on this from our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett. Kimberly, Trump's tariff on China is lower than he had been threatening when he was on the campaign trail, but he still says it's going to happen.
Yeah, that's right. And it's not a big surprise. I mean, look, we saw this in Donald Trump's first term, that he targeted China aggressively. And in fact, those tariffs stayed in place for the most part when President Biden came into office. So often what we see with Donald Trump is that he does this as an opening salvo to try and put in place better trade agreements in many cases, whether it be with Canada and Mexico, as he did just one day earlier with the 25% threat. But in this case, he says he's not trying to do that. What he's trying to do in this case, whether it's Canada and Mexico, whether it's China, is really take punitive action, because in the case of Canada and Mexico, he is upset about what he says is a lack of enforcement along the borders for illegal migration. And in the case of China, he says it's because of the fentanyl that is pouring into the United States and also into other countries like Canada and Mexico. And there's no question it's had a devastating effect in terms of the number of deaths that have occurred, particularly in the rural areas of the United States. So this is certainly something that the president says he's going to look at. He says he's going to re-examine this in the coming months. But right now, he says that this is something he's taking seriously and could lay the foundation for further action.
Jayant Menon is a visiting senior fellow at the ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute, and he's a former lead economist at the Asian Development Bank. He's joining us now from Singapore. So thank you very much indeed for being with us. Trump, during his campaign, had been threatening tariffs of up to about 60% on China. He's going with 10%. They're going to happen in about a week's time. How is China interpreting the messaging behind these tariffs?
Well, I can't speak for China, but I think they must be kind of relieved that it's only 10%, which is a lot better than 60%. But any increase in tariffs is not a good thing for China. Indeed, it's not a good thing for the US. And I think your earlier correspondent said that China feels that this is only going to increase inflation in the US. Is actually right. Tariffs have never worked to protect employment in the home country. It's basically a very badly designed tax on consumers and on producers, because a lot of inputs to exports are imported and will cost a lot more. So it'll be a tax on exports as well. But China, I think, will want to see what is to come next. This is unfortunately unlikely to be the end of the story. So I think they might be glad it's not 60%. But they are fearful of what is coming next.
If I understand it correctly, then in order for any tariffs to be effective, they essentially have to be targeted at products which are solely and entirely made within a particular country. But if I do understand it, the majority of, or certainly a significant amount of goods that are made in China also include parts that are made from other countries as well. So is it fair to say that this is not just a tariff that's going to affect China? This is a tariff that could actually have a much wider impact?
Exactly, that's right. So we live in a world now of global supply chains, where every component is usually produced in a different part of the world and brought together, usually in China, in the manufacturing of electronics and the like. So the value addition from China in manufacturing on average is only about 1/3 for so-called made-in-China goods. But this actually makes it a lot more expensive to do things in China, because the tariff is applied on 100% of the value, but only 1/3 of it is actually from China. And so removing that 1/3 removes a huge amount of the tariff on the final product. So what this means is that the effective tariff is about 3 times the actual tariff. And what you just said, which is other countries will also be affected, because everyone's involved now, or many countries are involved now in the production of these goods, not just China.
One would imagine that China is going to feel obliged to take some sort of action, some sort of respond to this. Is it likely to respond economically, or is it going to be a more a political pushback that we'll see?
I think when tariffs are raised for no particular reason or for illegitimate reasons, non-WTO consistent reasons, then countries will feel they need to respond, because they see this as an unprovoked attack on their sovereignty. So even though the best thing economically to do is not to retaliate, because tariffs hurt you more than anyone else, it's almost certain that that temptation to respond will be overwhelming. And the concern, of course, is that it'll lead to a domino-type tit-for-tat that will escalate and can get out of control very quickly. This is the fear at the moment.
Very interesting to get your thoughts on this. Jayant Menon, we appreciate it, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.